A fiery political speech cannot silence a judicial summons. Over 30 million citizens stand stripped of public trust while populist promises crumble into parliamentary noise. Across South Africa, decades of unfulfilled rhetoric have left millions questioning the very foundation of their political establishment. Then came the turning point. A single viral citizen commentary shattered the carefully curated illusion, exposing the pre-negotiated panic beneath the fiery speeches of the economic freedom fighters' leadership. It revealed a movement caught between revolutionary defiance and institutional scrutiny. This raises a fundamental query for our era. If power changes hands, but not structure, has anything really changed? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates, show your support with a like, a comment, or a subscription. It means more than numbers. It keeps the story alive. Welcome back to South African Dynamics. Today we dissect the shifting political landscape, the looming judicial reckonings, and the quiet awakening of a nation demanding true statecraft over political theatre. From the halls of Parliament to the judicial chambers in Pretoria, the struggle for democratic legitimacy has reached a critical junction. To understand the deep structural tremors currently shaking the South African political establishment, one must look towards the judicial chambers in Pretoria, where the Judicial Commission of Inquiry, led by the distinguished Justice Madlanga, continues its methodical search for institutional truth. For months, this solemn body has stood as a formidable pillar of constitutional accountability, summoning senior advocates, police generals, and heads of state directorates to answer direct, unyielding questions regarding systemic malfeasance. Yet, as the subpoena lists grew longer and the cross-examinations sharper, the focus inevitably shifted from routine administrative misconduct to the highest corridors of party political power. The economic freedom fighters, long positioning themselves as the uncompromising vanguard of the impoverished working class, suddenly found their senior leadership operating directly within the shadow of imminent judicial scrutiny. The political atmosphere across the nation transformed overnight from one of routine parliamentary debate into an intense, high-stakes constitutional confrontation. The decisive turning point arrived during a widely broadcasted national press conference convened by Julius Malema, the commander-in-chief of the economic freedom fighters. Stepping up to the microphone, Malema did not deliver a measured, structured policy presentation. Instead, he launched an aggressive, preemptive strike against the integrity of the judicial process itself. Wiggling his finger at the gathered journalists and cameras with calculated defiance, he declared in no uncertain terms that he would not be treated like a child by Justice Madlanga or his evidence leaders. He went further, uttering the dramatic challenge that if his defiance meant prison, then the state should move to arrest him immediately. To a casual observer, this appeared as an extraordinary demonstration of revolutionary courage and unshakable resolve. However, a rigorous political analysis reveals a far more strategic defensive calculation. This was not a display of genuine fearlessness, but a carefully rehearsed psychological groundwork. By framing impending legal inquiries as politically motivated persecution, Malema sought to condition his electoral base to view any future cross-examination not as a legitimate constitutional exercise but as an intolerable insult to his political status. This defensive posturing did not emerge in an institutional vacuum. The Commission's investigations have relentlessly uncovered an intricate web of financial transactions and political alliances that cut directly to the core of the party's moral credibility. At the heart of these expanding inquiries lies the catastrophic collapse of VBS Mutual Bank, where more than 2 billion rand funds belonging overwhelmingly to elderly pensioners, rural burial societies, and impoverished municipal treasuries was systematically looted and diverted. As evidence leaders pieced together the paper trails and banking ledgers, the names of prominent political figures and key associates, including Fadil Adams and the controversial businessman Firozkhan Ali, surfaced with alarming regularity. While the party leadership had previously praised witnesses whose testimony aligned with their own political narratives, the moment independent cross-examination threatened to link party operational funds to these diverted millions, their public stance shifted abruptly from enthusiastic support for the judiciary to open hostility towards the commissioners. This dramatic pivot exposes the fundamental conflict between political performance and judicial reality. For over a decade, the party leadership relied on radical symbolism, red berets, and fiery parliamentary disruptions to project an aura of complete invincibility. Yet when confronted by the quiet, methodical authority of the law, the theatrical gestures begin to lose their persuasive force. This is not reform. This is not rhetoric. This is accountability. Under the relentless weight of documented financial evidence, the revolutionary mask begins to slip, revealing a political organization consumed by legal anxiety and institutional panic. When a political movement spends years promising economic sovereignty to the most vulnerable citizens, it cannot easily explain why its figures appear so deeply entangled with the destruction of community savings and municipal stability. Yet, as the rhetoric grew louder and the defensive strategy unfolded across national broadcasts, a single citizen stepped forward to ask the one question the party leadership never anticipated. The climax of this national political drama reached its peak not in the mahogany-paneled hearing rooms of Pretoria, but across digital platforms where millions of citizens gathered to witness a devastating breakdown of the party narrative. A sharply articulated commentary from an ordinary citizen swept across social media, systematically taking apart the commander-in-chief's theatrical warnings. The commentator made a profound analytical observation: rehearsal is not confidence. Rehearsal is what individuals construct when they are preparing for a confrontation they know they cannot win. Innocent public figures do not pre-negotiate their own incarceration before a formal summons has even been signed or delivered. They appear before established constitutional bodies, provide precise testimony under oath, and allow the public record to defend their integrity. Dressing up institutional defiance as revolutionary bravery does not alter its underlying character. It remains the unmistakable posture of a leadership attempting to shield itself from scrutiny. This contradiction between public bravado and private legal maneuvering is far from unprecedented in the political career of Julius Malema. During his lengthy trial in East London concerning the illegal discharge of a firearm in a crowded stadium, the public was treated to a similar spectacle of radical rhetoric. On public stages, the party leadership proclaimed complete indifference to state sanctions, inviting the judiciary to impose prison sentences without hesitation. Yet, behind the oak doors of the court, an extensive and costly legal defense team was mobilized to contest every procedural detail. The defense went so far as to call social workers and clinical psychologists to deliver glowing character assessments utilizing every available legal avenue to ensure their client avoided the inside of a correctional facility. To claim total fearlessness before television cameras while deploying elaborate legal maneuvers to evade sentencing reveals a deep, fundamental disconnect. It demonstrates that the public bravado is a carefully constructed shield designed solely for political consumption. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for South African Dynamics' mission. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. This pattern of selective trust in state institutions extends directly to the party's rank-and-file supporters. When police authorities and high-ranking officials like General Kunene exposed corruption in rival political camps, party members celebrated the judicial mechanisms as vital instruments of national integrity. They openly praised the Madlanga Commission for its uncompromising pursuit of state capture and financial misconduct. However, the exact moment the investigation broadened to scrutinize figures within their own movement, specifically regarding illicit financial relationships with figures such as Firoz Khan Ali, the party's public stance underwent a dramatic inversion. The very commission previously hailed as a bastion of justice was suddenly vilified as an instrument of political persecution. Supporters were instructed to reject the authority of the proceedings, expecting 35 million South Africans to abandon their faith in constitutional process simply because a political icon was mentioned in testimony. This swift pivot from institutional praise to hostility reveals how populist movements attempt to operate above the law, demanding accountability for their opponents while claiming absolute immunity for themselves. This was not a mere legal dispute. It was the moment the public realized that the political rhetoric was shielding something far deeper. Beyond the fiery press conferences and the grandstanding in constitutional halls, the true fallout of this political crisis lands heavily upon the everyday lives of ordinary South Africans. For years, populist rhetoric promised sweeping economic transformation, land redistribution without compensation, and the nationalization of key industrial sectors. Yet the tangible outcome of these radical declarations has been economic stagnation and heightened investor anxiety. Foreign capital, essential for building durable infrastructure and creating sustainable employment, has repeatedly shied away from an environment characterized by legal unpredictability and ideological volatility. With national youth unemployment soaring past 40%, millions of young citizens find themselves trapped in a desperate struggle for basic economic survival. Instead of receiving genuine civic empowerment or actionable policy frameworks, the public is continuously fed a steady diet of political theater designed to divert attention away from governance failures and institutional decay. This economic vulnerability is compounded by a worrying decline in civic awareness across the younger generation, a phenomenon described by analysts as systematic political illiteracy. To understand the depth of this shift, one must recall the courageous generations of the 1970s and 1980s. During those pivotal decades of anti-apartheid resistance, young activists possessed a profound ideological clarity. They studied political economy, understood constitutional structures, and organized community movements with disciplined purpose. They recognized that political power was not merely about charismatic personalities, but about institutional accountability and structural change. Today, however, a dangerous disconnection has taken root. Large segments of the electorate have been conditioned to view politics not as a civic duty, but as a spectator sport dominated by media figures. Political elites across various party spectrums actively exploit this lack of formal political education, recognizing that a naive and disengaged electorate is far easier to manipulate than an informed citizenry demanding rigorous governance. Now let us turn this story into a shared moment. Write in the comments where you are watching from your city, your country, your corner of the world. South African Dynamics will read them with gratitude, and we send to each of you a heartfelt wish. May your journey be filled with dignity, hope, and light. This is more than a video, it is a gathering of voices across the globe. When political illiteracy is weaponized, the fundamental tension between democracy versus dictatorship begins to blur in the public imagination. Populist leaders exploit popular frustration by offering simplistic solutions to deeply complex structural problems, framing every institutional safeguard as an obstacle to the people's will. However, the electorate is beginning to demonstrate signs of fatigue. Recent municipal and national electoral cycles have witnessed a notable decline in support for radical populist platforms, with party vote shares falling below 9% in key metropolitan areas. Citizens are increasingly recognizing that fiery slogans cannot pay electricity bills, fix crumbling municipal infrastructure, or restore integrity to compromised public institutions. The illusion that a single revolutionary figurehead can bypass constitutional norms without consequence is rapidly unraveling before a populace hungry for authentic progress. As the broader populace gradually awakens to these realities, the escalating Julius Malema legal trouble ceases to be an isolated personal battle and becomes a symbolic battleground for the country's democratic future. If the rule of law can be openly defied through political threats and orchestrated public hostility, the fragile foundations of constitutional governance will suffer irreversible damage. Conversely, if the judicial process holds firm, it will signal to future generations that no individual, regardless of their political title or revolutionary credentials, stands above the collective laws of the Republic. When an entire generation is kept politically illiterate, who truly profits from the silence? From an international vantage point, the internal political friction shaking Pretoria is observed not merely as a domestic partisan dispute, but as a crucial barometer for constitutional democracy across the global South. Diplomatic missions in Washington, London, and Brussels are monitoring the proceedings of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry with meticulous attention. For Western allies and international financial institutions, South Africa represents an indispensable anchor of regional stability, financial infrastructure, and strategic diplomacy on the African continent. When legal accountability is challenged by radical populist elements, foreign observers do not simply evaluate the standing of individual politicians. They assess the structural durability of the nation's constitution itself. The central question echoing through international policy forums is whether a young constitutional republic can preserve its judicial independence when confronted by volatile internal political pressure. Within the halls of the African Union and regional diplomatic bodies, the stakes are viewed through an equally complex geopolitical lens. Southern African nations bound by shared economic networks and historical liberation ties recognize that institutional instability in Pretoria inevitably radiates across international borders. The lingering shadow of corruption investigations and party infighting threatens to undermine collective continental initiatives, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, which rely fundamentally upon predictable legal frameworks and transparent governance. Furthermore, international diplomatic cables from the United States Department of State have repeatedly highlighted the delicate balance between maintaining strategic trade partnerships, such as the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and ensuring that recipient nations adhere strictly to democratic norms and statutory accountability. This heightened diplomatic scrutiny directly intersects with the deepening EFF political crisis as global analysts examine how populist instability impacts sovereign risk ratings and foreign direct investment. International investors managing capital portfolios worth hundreds of billions of dollars remain deeply sensitive to political declarations that threaten institutional stability or property rights. When political figures engage in aggressive rhetoric against constitutional commissions, international markets react not with ideological bias, but with capital flight and increased borrowing costs for the host government. The broader international community recognizes that true national sovereignty cannot be sustained through inflammatory speeches. It requires resilient institutions capable of guaranteeing legal certainty and upholding the rule of law. As international observers watch the pillars of Pretoria hold the line, the question remains whether constitutional democracy can withstand populist pressure. As South Africa navigates this critical political crossroads, the road ahead demands a fundamental choice between institutional renewal and political decay. The era in which populist rhetoric could effortlessly mask governance failures is swiftly drawing to a close. Citizens across the nation, exhausted by decades of unfulfilled promises and corruption scandals, are beginning to demand a political landscape defined not by grand theatrical performances, but by tangible administrative competence and constitutional integrity. The ultimate test for the Republic lies in its ability to enforce the rule of law without fear or favor, ensuring that democratic institutions remain impervious to political intimidation. Rebuilding public trust requires an unwavering commitment to institutional transparency, where statutory bodies operate with total independence and public officials are held rigorously accountable for their actions. In this evolving national scenario, the structural clash between accountability versus impunity will dictate the trajectory of South African democracy for generations to come. If constitutional mechanisms prevail, the Republic will demonstrate that its legal order is capable of holding even the most formidable political figures to account. This transformation represents far more than routine administrative reform. It signals the maturation of a constitutional democracy determined to protect its sovereign principles. The path forward requires a populace that actively engages with political education, rejecting simplistic populist slogans in favor of substantive policy debate. When citizens reclaim their voice and demand ethical governance, the foundation of the state shifts from chaotic political theater to durable institutional stability. To achieve genuine democratic renewal, society must recognize that statutory authority cannot be compromised by political threats or public disruptions. This is not law. This is not justice. This is enforcement. Without the fearless execution of judicial mandates, constitutional rights remain mere words printed on paper. The strength of a republic is measured not by the eloquence of its political leaders, but by the relentless impartiality of its judicial enforcement. By standing firmly behind constitutional bodies, like the Judicial Commission of Inquiry. South Africans are stepping out from the shadow of political manipulation and asserting their right to an honest, transparent state. The struggle for constitutional integrity is not merely a legal battle taking place in judicial chambers. It is a profound moral commitment to restoring dignity and hope to a nation that has suffered too long under the weight of political deceit. Before we close, let us pause. What you have just heard is not simply an episode of history. It is a reminder that sovereignty, dignity, and hope are still alive, waiting to be claimed. If this message has moved you, then subscribe to this channel. Not because we ask for numbers, but because we are building a space where voices of independence are honored and where stories of pride continue to be told. By subscribing, you are not just supporting us, you are choosing to walk with us into the next chapter of Africa's unfolding story. The gavel of history is about to fall, and no political speech can alter the verdict of truth. What we are witnessing across South Africa today is not merely a transient political scandal, but a profound constitutional reckoning that will echo through history. As the nation confronts this ongoing EFF political crisis, the boundary between populism and constitutional democracy is being redrawn before our very eyes. For decades, millions of citizens placed their trust in revolutionary rhetoric, hoping for genuine economic liberation and social dignity. Yet, as judicial inquiries uncover systemic irregularities and financial misconduct, the public is demanding authentic governance rather than dramatic parliamentary performances. The expanding Julius Malema legal trouble serves as a vital test case for the Republic's founding promise that no leader, regardless of their charisma or political status, remains above the supreme law of the land. This moment demands deep reflection from every observer of South African politics. If a nation has the vote but not the voice, is it truly a democracy? True sovereignty does not reside in the fiery speeches delivered from political podiums, nor does it belong to parties that weaponize public frustration for institutional immunity. It belongs to the millions of hard-working citizens who build the country daily, who uphold constitutional integrity, and who insist upon total public accountability. As this chapter unfolds, the legal proceedings surrounding the ongoing Julius Malema legal trouble will demonstrate whether statutory institutions can maintain their independence under extreme populist pressure. The future of the Republic depends upon the unyielding courage of its judiciary and the civic awakening of its people. Thank you for walking this analytical path with South African dynamics. Together we continue to seek truth, honor dignity, and defend the promise of a constitutional republic that belongs to all its people.